You set? Okay. So I'll call the meeting to order. It is 7 o'clock. Our first order of business are the minutes of April 16th, 2019. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the minutes of April 16th, 2019 with any amendments thereto.
Page 1.
I have a request to change. It's under section 3, public comment. Mr. Bomer has mentioned that the hamlet that he's a resident of is not part of Finney Crossing. And so I'm asking, or he's asking, that the words "at Finney Crossing" be crossed out and the rest of it can remain.
Sounds good. Page 2. Page 3.
One technical thing under number 11, manager's report, the fourth bullet where it talks about the savings because of the water tank. It uses the word "a grant" when the correct technical term should be loan forgiveness.
I referred to it as a grant because, but you're right, I mean, that's what it is,
It's-
but I did use that term.
I work in the program, so sorry about the technical correction. We are now technically correct on this item.
Good.
So, the manager's report.
Before the bullet.
I just was really thinking about something on page 2.
Sure.
And I don't know, it'd be at the consensus of the board, but we all, I know I recused myself, but everybody had an extremely difficult time with number 7. And I kind of would like that reflected in the minutes, that this was not an easy decision, that was not done lightly, and it was not necessarily, I know that the sentences in there is that the developer followed the rules in the process, but I guess I kind of want something in there that says none of us were really in favor with this, there just was no legal grounds, and maybe that's not an appropriate thing, but there was such a discussion on that. And I follow whatever your lead, I just had to say that.
We certainly did have discussion, we did have misgivings about having to do this, which is sort of talked about a little bit in the motion that Ted made as well, with reluctance to not join the appeal. So if you would.
Okay, because I read that to look like it was just Jeff Ferris with reluctance to not join, and I knew that it was Ted, and I knew it was all of us, and that's,
Right.
I'd be in favor of there being a sentence added to the last paragraph before the motion along the lines of, the difficulty of this decision, or struggled with this decision, but ultimately, type of thing.
thank you.
Yeah.
I think that would be good.
Do you need anything further than that, Rick, or you're all right? How about it was with great reluctance that following discussion, the consensus of the select board is the developer followed the rules. Will not join in the appeal of the Act 250 permit as there are no legal grounds to do so. Guys like that?
Yep, I'm good.
No, I just was mentioning the word policy, that's all.
Can you say that again?
It was with great reluctance, following the discussion, that the consensus of the select board is the developer followed the rules and the process to secure a permit, and the select board will not join in the appeal of the Act 250 permit as it has no legal basis to do so.
Good.
You provided that language later.
Yes. Thank you, Terry.
Anything else on page 2 and now page 3?
So, sorry, page 3.
Somebody else on page 3, Jeff?
I'm good on page 3.
Moving on to page 4.
So one thing on page 4, it's the St. Patrick's School. I don't know, maybe somebody else picked up on this, maybe not, but future readers are going to read that and go, the closing of, for St. Joseph's is scheduled for the week of, and they're going to sit there and go, I didn't realize there was the St. Joseph's in Williston, nor that it closed. So I just wonder if we should add a little more information there.
Right, so St. Joseph's School in Burlington.
Right, and it was the grant that we were willing to step in and help.
Yes.
And it just should be a little additional information, so future
Closing
readers.
for the purchase of the property, for something to that effect?
Yes, and that, it was the grant that Williston participated or assisted in obtaining.
Right. Specified that the school is in Burlington. Anything else on page 4? If not, all those in favor of approving the minutes of April 16th, 2019 with amendments, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, and we'll move on to public comment. If there's anyone in the audience who wishes to make any public comment on any issue on the agenda or not, this is your opportunity. And seeing no hands raised, we'll move on to the Catamount Forest Land Lease Agreement with Eric.
So the board may recall this was originally discussed back in April. It's looking at an agricultural use lease for Harold DeGraff to provide mowing service at the Catamount Community Service Forest for 3 meadows located there. He's provided this service for the last 5 years. Now, if the town is in ownership of the property, that the town will need to grant the use of this land lease agreement. The board requested that the town attorney review the draft lease that was brought forward in April, and there was consensus to proceed. Included in your packet tonight is an updated lease agreement after a legal review. Mr. DeGraff is fine with the lease terms. He's looking to fertilize the fields this week, if possible, if the board approves this evening.
This is similar to what he's been doing for years now.
Yep, it would be business as usual. There's a change in ownership, so we're looking to have the town make this agreement.
Comments?
Just a couple hopefully quick things. So this is not a one-year agreement. This is whenever into the future till either party, I guess, decides to terminate it. Did I get that wrong?
I believe you have a
Just for everybody's note, Gordon and I are sharing Gordon's glasses tonight because I forgot.
I'm gonna help.
It says upon termination of the agreement, it doesn't say how long.
Yeah.
So can I ask a question on those lines too? So will this come back each year, depending if there's not a term agreement for this? Is that what the question is on the table, or?
I think
Yeah, we
we
have,
should have a term.
yeah.
And so we
Okay. Sorry, I picked. Actually, my bigger question is the last item, number 16, and is this standard? I know we have other similar agreements with town land that's, I think they grow corn on it, not mowed like this, but are these requirements standard? My concern is are they overly onerous or expensive for the farm? I'm sorry?
No.
No.
The short answer is no, but each side has to have their insurances.
Okay, so this is good, necessary, and
It's actually not that expensive.
an appropriate cost, okay?
I consulted with the League of Cities and Towns for some language here.
Yeah, the liabilities seem high, but it's not expensive premiums.
Okay, okay,
I mean, and what I meant by that was the liabilities seem high to you, they're standard and
Yeah.
not expensive premiums.
okay.
So, getting back to the term question, I would suggest maybe a 2 or 3 year term would be, I don't think we want to go any longer than that.
Yeah, I agree.
So, what is the consensus of the board on that?
Either one,
Yeah,
in your sound discretion.
Yeah,
Well, then, I'll suggest 3 years.
Yep.
and we'll allow
Good.
that, if there's agreement on that.
So can we approve the agreement with the addition of the term limit tonight?
We entertain a motion to that?
I would.
I'd move to authorize the town manager to enter into an agricultural use lease agreement with Harold DeGraff at the Catamount Community Forest with a term of 3 years.
I'll second that.
Is there discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, then we'll move on to the service on town boards policy. And again, Eric, you are the one that drafted this, I believe.
Yep. So you have before you tonight a first draft of this policy for review and discussion. It's intended to formalize our administrative practices for volunteer management and establish volunteer expectations and policy. Just a quick outline of what's contained in here, and then we can go through in more detail. Sections 1 through 3 formalize the process that we've used for volunteer recruitment, appointments, and reappointments each year. Section 4 is really the heavy policy section where we're talking about various expectations for town volunteers. Attendance, taking a leave, preparation, participation, working relationships, decision-making, and ethics and conflict of interest. And I've drafted in section 5 a leave of absence section to consider. So we can, happy to go through each section, and for discussion, I can make notes and get the board's reaction if this is a policy you want to move forward with, and any discussion and further edits for me to come back with a second draft here, if so.
Sure, so let's go briefly through section by section and see if we have any comments or questions on them. The purpose you already have mentioned, and is there any questions or comments regarding that part? Okay, moving on to number 2. So Erica's outlines briefly.
The only question I had here, Eric, if you don't mind, is you say by a majority vote of the select board. And I just want to make sure I understand. So for instance, if 4 select board members were present during the vote and the vote was 2-2, it would not pass?
That's correct.
It needs 3 members of the select board. Make sure it wasn't a majority of those present or voting, okay.
Policies that require that anyway.
Yeah, just want to make sure I understood, yeah.
Our rules of transmission require 3 votes.
Okay, thank you. I actually knew that, and I was just testing you all.
I had I have no problem with any of this, but, and I don't have a problem with section 2 at all. It does seem, I just want to point out that, don't we have, I mean, each board has their own rules now. I mean, the planning commission, the DRB, the conservation commission, so, I mean, this kind of states what we're already doing, which I think is important to do, but we're not changing what's going on.
Yep, yeah.
We do have some boards that don't have specific charges. The ones you mentioned are ones where we do have under state law.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, our social organizations committee is one, for example. I think technically the Brick Church trustees do not have one. The Cemetery Commission, the board just fairly recently adopted one for that, and the Recreation Committee is just a little bit older than that one. So we're gradually catching up on the ones that don't have them, but.
Anything else on the appointment process? About volunteer expectations?
Just a comment, I like the 60% meeting attendance, and I also like that the consequence would be that you might not be reappointed. I don't think this is the proper place for it, but the question I did have is, it's only come up as a possible threat a long time ago for a member of the DRB, and that person resigned, but we do have the authority to revoke somebody's position on a board.
Since I had the same question, is there a removal aspect of this that we want to address?
I believe that would fall under the ordinance, the ethics and conflict of interest ordinance talks about a procedure for removal.
But, I think the question, though, is there may be circumstances that are not covered by that ordinance, possibly like the one you're talking to, because I know which one you're referring to. And I think that did really fall under the ordinance. And so there may be circumstances that the board might want to remove someone from office. Obviously, we're talking about appointed office rather than elected. So it's all-
Yeah, and, you know, it's kind of interesting, because, I mean, if we don't have a policy on it, but the select board is the one that appoints somebody, it kind of, I know everybody's probably thinking, isn't this reminiscent of the administration of Andrew Jackson? And I think it is. Where Jackson was the first president to fire a cabinet member, and it was controversial because the Senate confirms them, so the Senate was saying, well, you have to come to us before you fire them, and he's like, no, I'm not gonna. But I wonder, I think we would be in the same position.
Your sentence for that should be under the appointment process, I think, at the end of the first paragraph.
So,
In the event of a conflict of interest, blah, blah, blah.
but this is different than a conflict of interest, though.
Or a,
I guess I'd like to give that a little thought and come back with either sentence or paragraph, and maybe even check the legal counsel.
Yeah.
on that. Is that
Yeah,
possible?
I agree. And it just, I don't want to belabor the point, but it seems like one policy consideration would be that we do want the boards to be autonomous, and it's possible that a select board in the future might not be, might be wrong in their decision. And so the autonomy of another board, particularly the quasi-judicial ones, would be important. On the other hand, if you've got a situation where one board member is, frankly toxic and creating terrible problems at a meeting, then, I would want this select board or a future select board to have the power to get rid of it.
Okay, I think we'll explore that and address it in a second draft.
Didn't we have, when we were looking at the problem with the DRB, didn't we have a statute that said we could, or part of a statute that said we could remove that, an individual from that board?
That may be, that's one of the boards that is heavily dictated by state law.
Yeah, right.
But that would be part of our research, because there may be a difference between those kind of boards, the quasi-judicial type, for example, versus the Recreation Committee, or the Brick Church trustees or something.
I believe I got some guidance on this of VLCT a little while back, so I'll check for that information too.
Good.
There is a Vermont Supreme Court case on point to some degree from 1999 involving the town of Colchester. They tried to fire, I think, members of the planning commission. I think the planning commission had the DRB authority back then. And it went to the Supreme Court as to whether or not they could do it or not.
There's a case in Milton too.
Really interesting cast of characters.
Might be the Recreation Committee. Might be worth checking them.
At the top of page 4, I got out my handy dictionary, and on the top line, it talks at the very last, central tenets, it should be tenets, T-E-N-E-T-S. Anything else on meeting preparation or participation during meetings? Effective working relationships? And the last page, decision considerations and ethics and conflict of interest, leave of absence.
I was very glad to see the tying that folks who are elected to represent Williston on a regional entities board, that they need to represent Williston's policy. But I wonder if we need to go a little bit further and talk about, the concept is we don't want them out there promoting what they think is right. It really is what's consistent with what the select board or the town manager, I think is right. And I wonder if there should be some language about, and I don't know what the language should be yet, but language that talks about periodically or may need to check with the select board or the town manager when they're uncertain what the policies or the desires of either are. Does that make sense?
Doesn't, it's already there.
Oh,
Not in here.
can I borrow the glasses again? 'Cause I didn't see it.
No, no, no.
It's not there.
Oh,
We have the select board a while back adopted or either that or approved, I don't recall, but it was a regional guidelines, or guidelines for serving in regional boards, and that wording is in there. And we require every person who is appointed to a regional board to receive a copy and acknowledge receipt of that. You can find copies of that online.
okay. And thank you for bringing that up. I guess I somehow forgot about that. If you could make just a reference here maybe to that document?
I was gonna say, yeah, their appendices were actually, this is really well done. Nice job.
Any further comments regarding that document? Right, so we'll see it back again. Moving on to Route 2 construction project update. And we do have Brandon Kipp from AOT, and Stephanie Barrett, our public outreach person for, not for the agency, but public outreach.
Oh, you are? Okay.
So welcome, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Yeah. So I'm Brandon Kipp. I work with the Vermont Agency of Transportation. I'm the project manager for the resurfacing project out here on US 2. Maybe we should just introduce ourselves real quick. Stephanie, you just want to?
Stephanie Barrett, and I am the public outreach consultant for VTrans.
I'm Christoph Lett, I'm the resident engineer on the job.
I'm George Barrett, I'm with Stephanie, I'm her assistant.
Okay, so this project, it begins near Boxwood Drive, kind of where we left off, actually right where we left off 2 years ago with the reconstruction project we did from South Burlington to Williston. And it extends 2.4 miles on US 2 to a point just east of North Williston Road. The treatment for this project is not like what it was on South Burlington, Williston. This is just a 2-inch mill and fill is what we would call it, where we cold plane 2 inches, followed by some resurfacing, some small patching, repair work, followed by a 1/2-inch shim course is what we would call it. And then the final lift of pavement would be 1.5 inch wearing is what we would call that on top of the 1/2-inch shim. And then the markings and some minor drainage work with the existing catch basins. One of the things that we are adding to this project is bike features. Currently, there's no bike features out there today. One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to be removing the truck ramp going into town, and we're going to reutilize that space into a two 11-foot lanes, a bike lane buffer, and 2 bike lanes. And then that'll diverge into 2 bike lanes as you get into town. So that's one of the kind of, not just paving work that we do. We do look at the bike features and safety aspects throughout the corridor. What else are we doing? This work is going to be done all at night. I think the contract says 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. are the...
7 p.m. to 6 a.m.
7 p.m. to 6 a.m.?
Yes.
Okay. Those are the working hours. I understand there's probably some concern over the noise. However, the good news about this project is the current schedule is showing that they're going to be like 2 months ahead of schedule. So the final lift of pavement and the final markings will be completed just before 4th of July. So,
Mackerel. Yeah.
let's
That's,
see.
Weather permitting.
Right.
that's important to the town, I assume.
Yes.
We have a little parade usually on the 4th.
It's roughly $1.5 million. I'm not sure if I mentioned that before. That's the total cost of the project. So relatively small compared to what we did before on South Burlington-Williston segment. It's only a 2-inch treatment, relatively quick duration, and we're adding some bike features.
So thinking about the noise. The big problem, of course, will be in the village of Williston, because the houses are scattered until you get here. So roughly how long would it take during an evening to do a section of 100 feet, or how much can you do in it?
Yeah, I get the schedule here from the contractor. Chris, I don't know, can you maybe shed a little light on that? You've seen it in action.
As far as paving goes, I mean, we're gonna move pretty fast. It's a little bit of excavator work that we may be in the same area for, I mean, it wouldn't be more than a night, but we're gonna move, it's gonna move fast if we're gonna be done by July 4th.
So you could do the whole village essentially from the top of the hill to the intersection down here in one night?
Paving probably two.
Two,
One
one
lane.
each way?
Yeah.
So you're not digging up, you're not grinding the surface off?
Yeah, we're milling 2 inches.
Right, that's where the noise would come in, yeah.
At one point, I thought there had been talk about doing a little bit more work, because you have a concrete slab under
Yeah,
there.
right.
And you end up with cracking where the slab ends and the asphalt goes beyond that slab.
Yeah,
So that's not going to be addressed then?
no, this is, I mean, typically this kind of treatment would cost around $400,000 per mile. This one is about $600,000 per mile, but you're looking at a slab removal project, you're probably upwards of $2 million a mile. So when you start to, program everything from a statewide basis, it's hard to justify those larger treatments. But I do agree with you, I think we should have continued the slab removal treatment through the Williston Village. Another kind of thing that kind of what happened over the last 3 or 4 years is the project programming sort of duties got shifted away from pavement design, where I work, and got shifted in that, like an asset management bureau. So they're kind of telling us what projects to be working on. So the way that this was programmed was they take a bunch of like system data from all over the state, and then they rank a whole bunch of segments throughout the state, and then they also, the RPCs and the maintenance districts also rank some of these segments that the system pulls out from the data. So this is purely kind of data, RPC, sort of worst of the worst roads in the state. Small, thin treatments.
Is the cost-benefit analysis part of that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I totally agree. I mean, I believe that if I were to be programming a project on US 2, I would, through Williston, I would continue the slab removal treatment through the village. And actually, on US 2, I'd just keep going on US 2 until Montpelier, because I think in Montpelier is where the slabs end. So, I don't know what it is. It's the asset management decided to program it at a 2-inch mill and fill scope.
Do you have a sense of how long this new service will last?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think 10 years at least that this service would last.
I think that's probably good. The current service was paved about 20 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the idea with this treatment too, I've heard too that this treatment is supposed to set us up for maybe a larger treatment. So it's not, I'm not saying that the slab removal scope is off the table, but maybe this is just an interim fix until we have enough money to justify that larger treatment.
But along those same lines, there are some, I'm a cyclist, and there are some parts of the pavement, between Taft's Corners and the start of the hill you were just talking about, where the truck passing lane, or the passing lane will be removed, that are in pretty rough shape. And I guess my question is this treatment going to be sufficient to take care of those, I don't know what the right word is, deficiencies, those problems in the road surface?
You think it's that out of shape to the point where it needs something a lot more than just a 2-inch?
To the point where cyclists were complaining that it was so bad it was, is or approaching dangerous, because you got to move into the lane to avoid it on a
Right.
busy road.
Right,
So that's the best way I can describe it.
yeah.
And then the other question I have could you describe the bike feature that, when starting in Taft's Corners, going to the village, could you describe what the bike lane features will be?
Yeah, I think they vary all throughout the corridor.
I'm gonna piggyback on Jeff's question there as well, because I'm looking at, like, you talked about shoulder work, and then I think of like where tap corners are and the markings that are on, you know, the
Yep.
pavement itself, or whether they're gonna be green. We come into an intersection that's fairly busy now, that's not a stoplight, that's a four-way stop in Williston. I'm not a cyclist, but I'm not against it. And I know a lot of Williston residents do that, so can you kind of, when you're looking at that, kind of talk about what those markings will look like? I think that's
Yeah,
what
so,
Thank you.
Jeff's
Yep.
asking.
So it looks like, kind of at Boxwood, there'll be like a 5'6", oh, actually, it starts right here. Yeah, approximately about a 4-foot bike lane on either side of the road, and when it crosses Boxwood, it'll be those green, sort of green blocks across Boxwood. And then those bike lanes will continue on. And then when you hit, Maple Tree Place and, Zipper Road, actually, it turned to a 5-foot bike lanes on the other side, and like I said, those green dashes go across those two roads. Same thing with Talcott Road. And then when you get to the east of Talcott Road, you'll have one of those situations where if a bike is going west, it'll have to sort of cut across the right-hand turn lane. I know there's varying opinions about that, but you have one of those there. And then those dashes kind of diverge into a 6-foot, we try to do the best we can with the scope of work that we had, but a 6-foot bike lane is pretty wide, and even 4 feet, sometimes we struggle to get 4 feet. And then that's a bike, or I want to say they call it a shoulder. Is it a shoulder or a bike lane? Yeah, they got bike lanes. So yeah, about 5-foot bike lanes, and then a regular dash through Talcott Road. And east of Talcott Road, you have one of those situations where you're going across that right-hand turn lane, and then it goes into a bike lane again, roughly 5-foot bike lanes on the other side. And then 5-foot bike lanes. The dash across Southbridge Road, the green dashes. And then we have enough width here to have a bike lane buffer now. This must be where the truck lanes are. We have a 2-foot bike lane buffer with 5'6" bike lanes, with 2 11-foot lanes. And that's, goes for a ways.
Oh, yes, the buffer's nice. In fact, I'm good with having a 4-foot bike shoulder lane in many parts of the road is a vast improvement over what's there now.
Yeah, yeah,
In places, I mean, there is literally no shoulder
right.
to the right of the white line.
Yeah, yeah. And, I mean, the truck lane was kind of awkward too because it was so small.
Yeah.
And, you know, it really wasn't warranted. So, I mean, that'd be a huge, huge improvement, I think, just getting rid of that.
Many people try to pass me there.
Yeah, yeah. And then the,
What's that?
Pick up that speed.
I can't, my car won't.
and then there'll be symbols, some symbols through the village, with the striped bike symbol. And the green dashes going through, Mooney Hill Road and Lincoln Road.
And the same width, the 4-foot minimum?
Yeah, we're able to get 4'6" through the village, surprisingly, yeah. We're also putting back those red crosswalks. There's an agreement with the town, I guess, to put back those red imprinted crosswalks, so we're putting those back.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Could shift gears a little bit on you. We talked about noise. Will dust be an issue? Because, you know, through the village, homes are very close to the road, and I'm just curious if dust will be an issue.
Yeah, Chris, based on your experience, what do you think?
Yeah, they need to have a vacuum truck to try
It's happening, you know, I'm not complaining or something like that. It is happening during what can be the hot part of a hot part of the summer. People like to be outside on their porches, and they may be limited while the construction's going on. Okay.
Further questions?
So the town may get some calls, obviously, complaints, but you folks have my number. Everything should be directed to me, and then I'll go through the state and take care of whatever issues come up.
I do have one other question. When I'm driving, it might be a town question, when I'm driving on North Williston Road towards Route 2, there's one of the road signs, you know, temporary road signs that's put up that talks about a May 12th start date. Is that for this project?
Yes.
Okay. Perhaps you know, perhaps you don't. Is there also a project that's going to repave Route 2 from the village east towards Richmond? We have been told there would be.
Yes, there's a project that's programmed, and that's actually a slab removal. Ironically, that's gonna be probably a slab removal project, which mismatches the segment we did before with this one. So,
Yeah.
I think that's under Matt Bogacek, he's my counterpart. I think that project is a 2022.
Oh, that far in the
that
distance.
far. Yeah, I think they're trying to do survey, I guess, this summer. In their geotechnical sort of investigative work this summer, but I think it's budgeted or something for 2022.
Okay, but that will be the slab removal.
Yeah.
That is good news, because that road is in pretty bad shape also. Okay.
First joints, you know.
Yeah. Or just the edge, you know, where it breaks off.
Right, right.
Okay. All right, good, thank you.
You probably don't have any information about the park and ride that's being proposed, or it's more than being proposed, it's been permitted on Route 2A, just beyond the interstate.
I don't know too much about that. I could probably
been
get you in touch
postponed,
with
yeah.
somebody who is. That must be
Might be later.
yeah, it might be a
I think
different
Josh
project
is-
manager working on that.
It would be nice to have some information about where they're at with it. I know that the last I saw was probably a year ago about where the progress had been made on that.
Okay, yeah, I can look into that. I'm not,
If you
it's the
could-
first I've heard about it, so.
If you just get information back to Rick, that would be good.
Sure.
Anything else on the Route 2 project? No. Thanks very much. We
Looking forward
appreciate
to
you.
it being done.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, so we could skip over that until they show? Okay. So we'll skip over item number 7 until the other person arrives and go to the Catamount Town Forest Committee charge. And Eric, you're on that one too.
So with the Catamount Community Forest, town's ownership the last couple months, an administrative structure for management is needed to manage the property, implement the goals defined in the management plan. So the management plan calls for a new committee or the conservation to handle this management piece. Staff is recommending a new committee for this task. And early on, it's not clear the extent of the committee's, what extent will be needed. So we're recommending a small committee to start of 5 members. That can be easily expanded in the future as the needs are further assessed and get an idea of what's involved in the management of the property. So the select board has final decision-making authority over the property. The committee is advisory for policy and would also handle administrative management decisions for the property as they come up and as we further assess that and what's really involved there. So included in your agenda packet's a draft charge for this committee to consider. Melinda Scott, our conservation planner, has reviewed. We could also have the Conservation Commission and Recreation Committee be asked to comment as well if the board wants to move forward with this. And the purpose and background sections you'll see, I primarily took those from the approved forest management plan. And we noticed, Terry brought up right before the meeting that we overlooked putting in term limits for these positions in this draft. So that's something we'd certainly address as well if we move forward. Just looking for board's thoughts on establishing this committee, any feedback on this charge, and we can further develop this in the board wishes.
So I have sort of have we put the cart before the horse type question, and that is, when I'm looking at how this is explained in the manager's report, it says either this committee or the Conservation Commission would fill this role. So I'm wondering, has that "or" question been answered yet?
The Conservation Commission feels that this is beyond their scope.
Oh, okay, so that it has been answered. They've weighed in that they don't want this responsibility, if you will. Those may not be the best, okay, that I didn't know.
As you note, in the draft, it does call for one member to be, which I think is appropriate.
Yes.
They need to have a hand in this.
Yeah,
They just don't want primary responsibility for it.
okay, okay. Good, thank you, that helps there. And then the other question I had about the charge that you put together is, should it talk about what staff resources what staff sources will be provided? By that I mean, who will be the primary staff person who basically assists this committee? Or it might be persons.
Right, it very well might be, and I'm not sure I would want that taken away from my judgment. I really need, I would like the flexibility
Okay.
to determine, depending on the issue. It could be Todd Goodwin, our Parks and Recreation
Right.
Director, it could be Melinda, it could be both, it could be myself, Eric, it all depends on the issue.
Okay.
And I haven't yet figured out who I would be the primary person. It'll partly depend on how often this ends up meeting. If it's 3 or 4 times a year, that's one thing. If it's monthly, that's a whole different ballgame.
Okay.
I do like the composition of it a lot. I like the idea of the Conservation Committee, Recreation Committee, Select Board, and definitely 2 members of the public. I think that was well done. And I like that it's not too big as to not ever get a decision made.
Yes.
We can always grow over time if we find
Yeah,
that
but
need.
what you started with, I thought was good.
Initially, I think that the board envisioned a much larger group because there's so many diverse interests. But at this point, we don't know what the demands are going to be on, for decision-making and policy
I
decisions.
think you're actually much more likely to get something done with this than you would have with a 14-member group.
Any further comments? All right, we'll look for another draft of that one, too. Let's do the stormwater loan for Williston Commons. Or Eric, which one of you are doing? Okay.
So, Wilson Commons has a $105,000 stormwater loan request for financing for the stormwater improvement project. And I've got some notes, so James is here too, if you have any questions about what the project scope involves. They're gonna be working on modifying the existing stormwater pond, including grading, piping, precast concrete structures, stone fill, and landscaping. You may recall the interfund loan approved last month created enough funds available to make this loan in the stormwater loan fund. We took that, we knew this was coming, so we programmed these dollars along with the Meadow Ridge Phase 2 stormwater loan that the board approved last month. The town attorney's reviewed all the legal documents for this transaction. He's given the town the okay to proceed. Staff recommends approval of this loan.
So this is similar to the ones we've already done. Any questions or comments regarding this?
Just one quick one. In the past, you provided those loan agreements, and I just wondered if there's any reason for us to look at them. I could not add anything to them, but there are others who might have some thoughts or comments on that. So I just wondered if that's at all something that's, desired.
I can clarify, does it follow the same format as the other agreements?
Yep. And that was the oversight on my part.
I didn't mean it that way, because I wouldn't have added any value to it, but I did notice it was.
The attorneys chew it apart.
Right, yes, I was looking forward to that.
We try to be consistent
Yep,
in all these different
I had
agreements.
assumed that.
If there's no other comments or questions, a motion is in order.
I'd move to approve a loan to the Commons at Williston Village Planned Residential Development, Inc. for its stormwater improvement project in the amount of $105,000 and authorize the town manager to sign any legal documents required.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Let's go on to manager's report.
Moving right along. So, in your packet is the quarterly report for the months of January, February, and March. Each version of this we try to add to it, and a couple of each of these. For this report, we pulled out the finance office as a separate department, because really it is. And so both the narrative and the data points, or the measurements of activity have been separated out, and the manager's office is by itself. I think the only other thing of note in the report is our service request portal that we started back in early March, I think, March 1st.
Yeah,
somewhere.
Red Town meeting.
Yeah. Has been reasonably successful. We get 3 to 4 requests per day, and our staff is keeping up with it, because it's routed directly to the, depending on the request, it can be routed directly to the person that's responsible for responding, and it gives an automatic response back to the people with the request. And then the staff immediately prioritizes it. So if it's something that involves safety or something like that, it'll be #1 priority, and they know that they have to address it immediately. If it's a 3 or 4, then it's something that can wait a little bit. And it seems to be working. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna check in with staff, hopefully the next month or so, just to see how it's working on their end, on the customer service end, and see if there's any bugs for us to work out internally, but, yeah, I haven't heard anything bad about it, so.
Yeah, when I check with a couple members of the staff, they approach this with a little bit of skepticism, shall we say.
Yeah.
They view this as maybe causing more work for them, but I don't think it's turned out that way. In fact, if anything, I think it may make it a little bit easier. It's a nice format, and as long as we follow it works reasonably well. So, on the quarterly report, I don't have any other things to add. Let's see. We have a grant that we've received, and since we have James here, maybe he can address this. This is involving a stream cleanup project. Do you want to give us a 3 or 4 sentence summary? Since you're here.
Everybody? So the grant Rick is referring to is a Chittenden Solid Waste District grant. Every year, they provide the town funds for cleanup efforts, and this year, Rick asked around to staff for any ideas, and I threw out the idea of a, similar to Green Up Day for streets, a stream cleanup effort for our more urban stream reaches. And we've moved forward with that, and we've partnered with the Winooski Natural Resources Conservation District, and they are going to organize and really implement the stream cleanup. We're going to have initial meetings this month, and the effort's going to take place probably in early September.
I'm sorry, when?
Early September.
Okay.
A little more than 3 sentences.
Yeah.
The grant we received will not cover the whole cost of this, as I recall, but the Conservation Commission liked the project so much they agreed to put $1,000 of their budget towards this.
And if I may add, I've heard through the Winooski National Rivers Conservation District staff that they met one of the grant managers on the side through something different, and she said that they're actually really excited about this idea, they being CSWD. And they are interested in perhaps expanding that program to other communities. So this could be the kickoff to a new type of cleanup day.
Yeah, I think it's a neat idea, a great idea.
Since we mentioned Green Up Day, it was very successful again in Williston. We had many volunteers. There were a few early birds out doing Route 2 on the Friday before. I'm looking at Eric because he was one of the early birds. I joined he and Brad from the planning office. We decided to get an early start on some of it, so we did a section of Route 2. So that was a successful program. Another item I wanted to point out is there's and I think I included a little map in your packets on this. There's a small little lot that on Route 2, just before you get to the Industrial Avenue Route 2 intersection. I guess at one point in time, there was a barn which served a farm, and I think the farmhouse is located across the street from this lot. It's still standing, the farmhouse is, but the barn is long gone. It's kind of an orphan piece of land at this point. The current property owner doesn't want it. They've offered it to the adjoining property owner, which is I think the Munson Group, and they don't want it. So they're saying, gee, town, are you interested? And they suggested that it might be a site for a future pump station, sewer, water, or more likely sewer. We don't have any plans at this point to run put a sewer pump station there, but I could see it happening, at some point. We just don't know. It has very little value one way or the other. So I guess the question is there any interest for the town to pursue this?
There's no objection, but why didn't the Munsons want it? It's so tiny, it would have rounded out their lot perfectly, or squared it up.
I don't know. One of the things I'm concerned about that Eric mentioned too is, or maybe it was Terry, given the fact that it's part of a farm, you wonder what was going on there.
Big problem.
There's an underground storage tank, or maybe some farm chemicals that got dumped there. So it's something we'd have to research before we proceed. But I didn't even want to start that process. The board had no interest in looking at this further.
So the potential liability is there could be some contamination there of one sort or another.
We presumably would find that out. Yeah, we'd find that out hopefully before we.
And in terms of maintaining the land, is there any liability to the town from that standpoint? If we were to own it, do we have to, brush hog it once a year or something like that? No.
But you have to mitigate if there's a problem.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a whole different situation if there is some sort of contamination.
Oh, yes, yeah, then it's,
Short of that, you have no obligation to keep your land up or anything.
yeah.
So is this a purchase, or where is this?
It'll be a gift.
It's in consideration of $10 or more dollars.
Yeah, probably.
Consideration of love and compassion, have you ever seen that? I just saw it on a date. Consideration of love, and it was in consideration of love and other valuable consideration was what it was instead of $1.
Is there interest in pursuing,
Sure.
looks like,
I don't see why not.
me too?
We will pursue that. The Essex Alliance Church dispute, we have a tentative agreement which we're in the process of working out a actual settlement agreement. And I believe I've shared the draft with you already.
Yes.
I guess the question is, are there any major concerns that any of you have concerning the settlement agreement? Okay. I have shared that with the church, and we're waiting to hear back from the church at this point. If they approve it, and I have reason to believe they will, I mean, they may have some adjustments. We'll have to see what their legal counsel says, but then we'll be bringing it back to the select board for final approval.
Remind me, what was their original?
They originally requested 41,000 or something in that range.
42, I remember.
I knew you had done really well, I just couldn't remember the original number.
Yeah. And along the same lines is, my question was, is you come up with a certain amount in here, and it's based on purchasing or paying for certain items that were installed. and it's along the lines of, you know, what caused you to, what's the rationale behind those items, I guess might be the best way to put that.
Well, there is no specific items. The church's point was that a certain section of this path was far more expensive because it was going down a steep embankment and a retaining wall was required. And so that was their argument. And the board, through discussion, agreed that we would negotiate, and the board gave me some parameters to work with, and I stayed within those parameters. And
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not arguing or anything, it's just that when I read it, it said, you know, the dollar amount, and it says for costs paid by the church to construct the retaining wall and for the railings. So I thought maybe the approach you took was to pull specific items out of their line items and say, well, this adds up to about that amount. But no, you really approached it from the dollar amount, if you will.
Yes.
Okay, all right, good.
because there was no real logic
Yeah.
involved, because their rationale, based on their permit, was not valid. You know, it was a false, they misunderstood the word meaning that was in their permit.
There's the whole interpretation on the top of the slope or bank.
Right. And so I think they realized that their interpretation was wrong, because I pointed out in my communication to them when I presented the offer, I said, if your interpretation was accurate, then you build it without a proper permit. But I said, it wasn't built without a proper permit because your interpretation was wrong.
Okay. Oh, wow, that's a real legal concept there.
Well, it's the way I
Yeah.
looked at it. So, I think the church has wanted to work with us on this, and I think we'll move forward with that. Reminder, we have the Community Forest Celebration this coming Saturday in the afternoon. Look forward to seeing at least some of you there. I know Terry will be there. And so it'll be an exciting event. And let's see, did I have anything else? I thought there was one other. I guess not. I'm all set.
You did mention there's in your report, it talked about the drug take-back event this coming. I noticed on the fire department bulletin board that they're doing a needle take-back this Sunday, I think between 10 and 12, which is kind of neat. Any other questions for Rick on his report?
Might as well, since I got the floor, I might mention one more thing. We're doing videotaping the latest version or edition of What's Up Williston, and why don't you tell them what the topic is?
Sure. We're doing kind of a spring theme, so I've got education outreach coordinator from the solid waste district to talk about backyard composting, and then we have two of our master gardeners and Wilson and Bloom members will be on to demonstrate planting techniques for tomatoes and flowers and going over some spring planting techniques and best practices as well. So
make
take them
sure
that Thursday morning.
Make sure you put that on your watching TV schedule, or watching on YouTube, I suppose.
Got this going. They have a present.
Okay.
So we'll go to item number 7, the Blue Pilot Stormwater Program, James Sherrard and Juliana Dixon. So come on up and let's see the show.
So Juliana was lucky enough to experience a few minutes of the meeting taking place in the town annex this evening. She's well-versed in a lot of different issues here at the town. If you don't mind, I'll just introduce Juliana and the Blue Program and let her take it over. PowerPoint.
Good.
Great. So Juliana Dixon running the Blue Program here, and actually it's spreading throughout Chittenden County a little bit. Burlington and Colchester have programs, and actually it's one of the reasons why I've been following their progress and been very interested about it. I won't go into too much detail since she'll give you a lot of that, but basically This is going to be a really wonderful mechanism for our residents to reach out to the town and then have someone literally come to their doorstep and walk through their property and say, this is how you can help stormwater. And the town will be able to facilitate that through providing funding for both the Blue Program's administration efforts and then also a rebate program if they implement certain systems to standards. So that obviously caught my eye, and at least one other resident's eye. We got an email in support of this project, even though it hasn't even come before the select board yet. And I'm not sure if Rick has shared that with you, but I have a copy here. So, and actually previously another resident reached out to the Blue Program on their own to talk about rain gardens. So from those pieces of information and just the general experience of the other towns, I'm really excited to talk about the possibility of starting the Blue Program here.
Thank you for the introduction, James. Do I have a-
Set up, you can just hit that arrow to advance the slide.
Great. All right, so my name is Juliana. I've been working in water quality for about 15 years. I've been in Vermont for 4, so somewhat new on the ground to Vermont, but we're moving fast. The Blue Program was launched quite a bit before I got here. This was an attempt to address burgeoning water quality issues in a way that would engage everyone, meeting them where they are. So this program includes an education component, an active component, and then an acknowledgement component when people do take action to address how water moves through their property and what they can do to affect.
Before you get too much, I noticed the blue has a registered, that little R thing. What does that mean?
It does. So you're familiar with LEED?
Yes, very similar, okay.
Very similar, right. So blue is LEED from a water stewardship perspective, looking at not just how water is managed on the outside of the property, but also how behaviors and practices affect it as well, including conversations about how we process pharmaceuticals. Do you pick up after your pet? Do you, I know this isn't an issue in Vermont anymore, but do you use detergents with phosphorus in it? Those types of behavioral components. So that trademark is owned by an external organization. I have a license to use the program.
Okay.
I'm not the only one in Vermont that does, but I am the only one that is actively on the ground every day.
Okay, all right, good, thank you, yeah.
Sure. So I'm going to try not to PowerPoint you to death here, but just do a very, very quick overview. So when I come into a person's home, the first thing I do is just sit down armed with an arsenal of handouts, and what I do is I try to identify where is this person in the water quality conversation? What is their understanding so far? Because, you know, what you hear on the news often is snippets, and so they'll get an idea that combined sewage overflows are an issue, but they might not know where it's happening, why it's happening, whether their micro watershed is part of the issue or not. So we talk about the cyanobacteria issue, combined sewage overflow, flood resiliency, so on and so forth, economic impacts of water quality, and how we are all contributing to the problem. Sure.
Just one quick point, we are not a CSO community.
I'm aware.
Yeah, okay.
I'm aware. However, your residents are affected.
Wait, what are?
Your residents are affected.
Oh, yes, no, don't, yeah.
And as an issue that is quite an issue on a statewide level, it's important that everybody have, even if their property isn't directly contributing to it, that they do have an understanding of the issue on a statewide level and how our approach to land management makes a difference. And I recognize that that's not an issue for Williston, but Williston has its own land management issues that are also making a difference to our waters. Right, so I have a couple of handouts here that I thought I'd pass around just in terms of some of the things that I talk to folks about. One of the things that I do spend just a quick minute of time on is, you know, I definitely hear a lot of finger pointing at it's all the farmer's fault, and why should I take action, or it's all the big developers, or, you know, how we do. And so I like to spend a minute just talking about, well, it's not farms, it's certain farming practices, and it's not every piece of developed land, it's how we're managing our impervious surface. And here, let's take a look at what you are able to affect. So just bringing people on board a little bit. And then, once I've covered a cursory education about the threats to water quality on a larger scale and then on a more immediate scale, and then looking at their property, I try to get people a little bit excited about it. You know, this is one of these social issues where we do have options, and our options are exciting. And so we talk a little bit about what other people are doing, what are larger urban areas doing in terms of thinking about development differently. You know, what can we do in Vermont to mitigate, especially we have a backroads issue and an issue with unpaved roads, and not everything has to be an unsurmountable challenge. I also work to reduce intimidation. Some people think that, you know, this problem is so large that we can't possibly do anything about it. And, you know, there's a conversation that, yes, everything matters. Every little thing matters. Even if nothing else, it's just being dedicated enough to start thinking about water differently, to start thinking about it the way we needed to think about recycling 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It was a foreign concept at first, but once you reduce barriers to intimidation, it becomes something normal. I've had some people be concerned that mitigating stormwater would not be aesthetically pleasing for their property. So I like to provide a few options for those people that, no, actually, if you're a little bit creative, this can be not only effective, but beautiful. So generally talking about, you know, the things that you're already familiar with, volume concerns, water quality concerns. I mentioned briefly earlier personal habits, how we manage our lands, whether we're using pesticides or fertilizers inappropriately, picking up after pets, so on and so forth. I've had a couple of homes really take it on in a big way. This is one of my favorite properties here. On the right, they have a rain barrel that's connected to the gutters from the house, which they route to their garden. They have a full overflow system that goes through the plants, and then even a secondary system that you can see feeding the strawberry bed over there. So Blue has been active in multiple municipalities over time, largely depending on grant support and partnership. We have a simple certification program that is really just looking at practices and water management on the property. But in some places, certain municipalities want to capture more information. So when I was in partnership with the City of Burlington, we had a more complex evaluation where I was also gathering data about the nature of impervious surface on each one of the properties. So at the end of the partnership, Burlington was provided with information about the types of driveways that their residents have, the types of roof surfaces, what the ratio of impervious to pervious is on their lots. So Burlington was able to make more get a little bit of a bigger snapshot than they previously had. This is an example of part of one of the reports that is provided to people at the end. So, for example, if Williston wanted to go with a simple evaluation, at the end, the homeowner would receive something that looks like this, which gives feedback as to each one of the components of the survey, but then they would also receive a picture that looks like this, and this would reflect what we talk about in person. So based on their land use practices, how much they want to mitigate, what their budget looks like, what their timeline looks like, I provide options for how we can mitigate the stormwater. The most recent partnership was with Burlington. We aimed to disconnect 11,000 square feet of impervious surface, and we well overachieved our target. We ended up disconnecting 14,000. By the time all was said and done, 60 properties made it before the final deadline. I just have a couple of pictures of some of the properties that took action through Blue BTV. There you go. So I'm currently in partnership with the town of Colchester. The town of Shelburne is looking to bring me on this summer. I have support from Sea Grant as well. And maybe Williston's next. I don't know. We'll find out.
That's very cool.
So, let me pass around a couple of these. Do you want to take those? So, those are the same. And then those are the same, and this is this is a commercial certification.
Juliana, while you're doing that, is the concept only to work with existing developed residential sites, or do you also work if somebody was putting in, let's say, like a small development? Would you work with that developer to do the site-specific, not development-wide, but more site-specific stuff that might happen?
That would be fantastic.
Okay.
So far, we have yet to be approached by developers in advance.
Okay.
So this has been mostly retroactive to development.
Okay. I'm not arguing one way or the other. I just wondered, where are you thinking about putting your eggs, if you will?
Well, I mean, it would be great if people thought about it during the design phase, right? Because then everything's mitigated in advance.
And it's always easy, right, it's always easier to do it when you have a undeveloped site versus trying to go in and make something fit your already developed site.
And I think too, in terms of sort of the culture of clean water that people talk about, when a developer can say, hey, we have units available, and by the way, these are blue certified, these are watershed friendly properties. Even if somebody's not already engaged in the conversation, it's gonna give them pause for thought. This is a watershed friendly property? Wait, what is that?
Yeah, okay. And the other, it's just a comment you were talking about, and James picked up a little bit in his memo where he talks about, these probably aren't quantifiable, but I happen to, think along the lines of marginal gains, and the point is once you start making enough, even though each one is marginal, once you start making sufficient marginal gains, you actually get somewhere, you get a real gain, if you will. And so I would look at this way. The question I have for James is, what pot of money will this come out of?
So.
The proposal, which is to fund it with $10,000 for fiscal year 2020?
So the short answer is, we can discuss the terms.
Yep.
Right now, I've discussed with Bruce and Rick about allowing $10,000 from a specific capital sheet, the watershed improvements. I have some language in the memo as to why it fits that sheet, but essentially, we have the funds for up to $10,000 for a pilot program to take out a watershed improvements, which traditionally has funded projects that are in our town-wide watershed implementation plan, TWIP for short. Yeah. Now, those projects are in a dedicated document that's actually a few years old at this point, and all those projects can be considered reactive. In other words, there's erosion. We know about it, we'll fix it when we can. Where a project like this would be proactive. So in the capital sheet, it says very clearly, the intent of these monies is to help the health of our brooks, which this program does undoubtedly, if not quantifiably. But the second part of the capital sheet says quite specifically it needs to be ranked in the TWIP, which this is not. So the intent of the benefit of this project would be the same, but it just doesn't meet that second checkbox in that particular capital budget sheet.
Okay.
That TWIP, as you call it, I believe was developed with the Conservation Commission a few years ago, and so in order to have it ranked, they'd have to go, either they or someone else would have to go through the process and add this as a new variable, I would think.
I would agree, and I've discussed with Bruce about changing the language for the capital budget sheet next time around to not eliminate projects in the TWIP, but provide a little more broad language that allows us to be reactive instead of just proactive. And perhaps when a project shows up that didn't exist when the TWIP was created, but clearly fits the intent, that we can address it with those funds.
Okay. And it's a program that involves rebates. The $10,000, how should I think of that in terms of, how should I think of that period? And what I mean by that is, how many properties would $10,000 provide rebates to? I mean, what is your typical rebate? what would be a project that they might do that they in turn receive a rebate for? You know, just help me understand that a little bit.
Well, so the city of Burlington offered rebates on a per square foot mitigated basis. So they paid either $1 per square foot or $1.50 per square foot mitigated, depending on the practice. And we targeted our outreach in CSO sheds.
Okay, yeah. Back to the CSO thing, yeah.
The town of Colchester is offering a $100 rebate for smaller installations and a $200 rebate for larger installations, which is really just saying, thank you.
Right, it's
Thank you for taking
not
action.
covering their costs, it's just,
No permeable driveways are going in with $200. But what I have found in my tenure with this program is that without the rebate, there is interest, and people will request evaluations, but the follow-through is a fraction of the evaluation. With a rebate, even if it's a small rebate, people are more motivated to act.
So it's more just like an acknowledgement, saying thank you to be proactive in this program.
Right, and I mean, it really depends, you know, we are still in somewhat initial conversations about how Williston might adopt this program, but if you have particular neighborhoods where you'd really like to motivate action, you know, you could structure that as appropriate.
I'm sorry, this is always sort of a difficult question to ask, but I feel it's important to understand, you know, what your relationship would be. I don't know how to correctly put it, but, you know, how do you get paid out of this, if you don't mind?
So my time for doing the evaluations and managing the program would be part of this.
Okay. So the $10,000 that, if we go through with that proposal, a piece of that would go to you for the time you spent, you know, getting around to all the, however many homes it is you can get into in Williston, in addition to the rebates.
Correct. Now, at this time, those dollars can be stretched slightly because I also have support from Sea Grant, simply to bolster these programs.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of an added support.
Okay.
Lake Champlain Sea Grant is a water quality, they're similar to an extension program through UVM. They run the Green Roundtable, oh dear.
They run the Green Roundtable and a lot of
Green
other,
Stormwater.
I believe they're federally funded. I could be wrong about that. I think they get their funds from the feds.
And if I may add one category, this is a pilot program, there'll be some ramp-up costs, and I envision some of those costs being diverted to getting the word out, and whether that's pamphlets handed out when the Brick Church Music Series kicks back in, or time pulling together Williston-specific mailing and or just web posting. Some limited funds would be designed to, again, just getting the word out.
Yeah. Okay.
So the question tonight is there consensus among the board to go forward and ask to have the program designed and come back? You'll come back with a proposal for us, I presume? Or is that?
So a more designed program, if you will.
If we know that the $10,000 is suitable to be used for this program, then we can come back with details on what that program would look like.
I'm in favor of that. I don't know what my ultimate position is gonna be, but I'm curious.
I am too.
So we've got to go ahead.
Yeah.
Good.
I think you'll have success. I mean, the hard part's gonna be, it's always gonna be difficult to measure that success. We just have to believe that there, you know, that marginal gains, you know, piece.
Well, if anyone is interested, I can send you the final Excel from Burlington, which quantifies not only the square feet mitigated, but also, given the average rainfall of Burlington, how many gallons captured that translates to. And so that is quantifiable.
Sure, we may not all understand it, but
Yeah, just two things. One, as a quantifiable aspect, 14,000 square feet in Burlington is close to a third of an acre. If you need to just treat a third of an acre of impervious, that's a lot of money if it's centralized. And secondly, I recently spoke to the Colchester Stormwater Coordinator. That may not be her title, but that's what she does. And she said the dollars they allotted are pretty much already almost spoken for, because their initial outreach they had so much feedback and interest from their initial outreach, they think they may have already spent all the money they allotted. So at least for Colchester, that's an indication that their population was really interested in taking advantage of it.
So it would be a good problem to have. The difficulty would be is we would not be able to fix it to the next budget season.
That'd be a great problem to have.
They, to put specific numbers on that, within 5 days of Colchester's mailing, I got 18 evaluation requests.
Do select boards get dibs on first?
I believe one of their DRB members has.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
So we come to that great category of other business, and Rick has a special events permit to talk about.
We have an application for a special event scheduled for July 19th. It's going to be at the Gardner Supply Center. They're going to have a private barbecue. And the alcohol provider for the special event is the Switchback Brewing Company. That's the business name. The license name is the Switchback Beer Works, Inc.
Any questions for Rick regarding this? Staff has no objections, I presume?
I'm going to just ask a facetious question. If I'm a fan of Switchback, should I excuse myself?
No.
Be a stock, owner of stock.
Oh, you will bring some. Is there a motion then?
So moved.
Second.
A motion has been made and seconded to approve the special events permit. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I have one thing on our charter legislation. It passed the House very easily, went to the Senate and got lodged in the Rules Committee. It was just released from the Rules Committee yesterday, along with a whole bunch of other charter amendments. It's already in the Senate Government Operations Committee. Right now, their rest of their week all shows just to be announced, so I suspect that it'll show up sometime later on this week. Any other business that we need to talk about tonight? If not, then we are adjourned.
Whoa.